I invite you all to think now of a childhood memory. Think of your favorite toy, your favorite food. Think you're about to take a bite, you're about to play with that toy, and then someone comes and says, "Can I play with it? Can I have some?" Or worse, an adult comes and says, "You need to share." How is that initial gut feeling for you? Is it pleasant or unpleasant? Would it be similar here to my son, that when his brother went in to grab a chip from his bag, he felt like the world was going to end? So if you had a feeling similar to that of my son, you are perfectly human. Our brains are designed to keep us alive, and at that, it detects threat. Bowen systems theory talks about this in the sense that as we're growing up in our environments, we detect threats, so we determine what is safe or not safe based on those memories, based on our environments. Now, even though it keeps us alive, if we stay in this mindset, we are unable to grow. Researchers have looked into something called a scarcity mindset. And when we have this scarcity mindset, we don't share. We're unable to build healthy relationships with others and even with ourselves. So we stay stagnant in our cognitive growth as well. But a way to think about this differently is to think about social capital. So when I think about social capital, is the ability to share resources with one another in a supportive environment. Dr. Gadier, a community psychologist here at the University of Charlotte, has looked at this, and he has researched this in a preschool locally here in Charlotte. He has looked at immigrant mothers, and he has noticed that even though they were in the same space, they were not really sharing with one another. They were staying in their own little silos. So as the structure was created for them to start sharing resources with one another, little clusters started forming. And this is what happens when we start sharing resources with one another. We start growing in our well-being. Employment rates started changing for these mothers, and they were able to start exchanging resources with one another. But as I started, and when I mentioned, for a lot of us, scarcity is based on the environments that we grew up in. And that was my case. I was born in El Salvador in the 80s, during the time that my country was at war. My family also experienced severe poverty. So a way out, many families found during this time was to immigrate into the United States. So my parents, by the time I was 18 months old, took the trip, crossed the border into the US, and made it to New York City. My mom landed a job as a nanny, and her employer offered to sponsor her, which means that through her employment, she would be able to become documented. My siblings and I were all underage, so we would all qualify. But this process took 6 years. So I was reunified with my parents by the time I was 7 years old. So when I think back to this experience, I didn't realize by at this point, I had created a very severe scarcity mentality. There was scarcity of freedom because I was living in a war. There was scarcity of resources because of poverty, and scarcity of attachment because I did not have my parents. And it had not dawned on me that I was living under this mindset until I was challenged by it in 2017. 2017, as I watched kids being separated at the border, I didn't just see those kids, those families. I saw my family. I saw myself. And something in me changed. I was not the same person after that. And I just said, there has to be more that I can do. But I didn't know what it was. First step I did was let me call Homeland Security. Let me see if they'll let me do something. They said, no, there's nothing you can do. In my desperation, I just turned, let me find out what's going on in the community. Who's doing what? Who's doing something about this? And maybe I can do something. At this point in my life, I have my master's in social work. My husband and I are building our restaurant businesses. We have Three Amigos, a Mexican restaurant locally here in Charlotte. And we had started expanding on our brand, Sabor Land Street Grill, which is a fast casual concept that we have multiple units in the Charlotte metro area. So I'm thinking, I have all these resources. I'm a social worker. There has to be something I can do. So I started attending meetings. I started getting invited into more meetings and more meetings. And I couldn't directly do something about what was going on at the border, but I learned about economic mobility, which was something that Charlotte was trying to figure out how to do something about it. So I started partnering with different agencies, and this is what really changed the course of my career. We started implementing social work principles within our company. So our main role is to be an employer. That's who we are. But then I was like, well, we can expand and start partnering around with different agencies. So we started partnering with agencies that were doing second chance employment, working with folks who were on house, people who had other barriers such as limited language skills, and we started working with these folks. Quickly we realized, okay, we are working with them, they have a job, but they're still facing a lot of barriers. So now I keep expanding my network, and now we're referring for housing, we're referring for childcare, so different things that had nothing to do with work, but impacted their ability to keep their job. And again, this initiative didn't just start on my own, it started because I was able to partner with different people in the community. So as we continue building trust with our employees, now they start coming to us and say, what else is there for us? How can we grow with the company? So the leadership team would sit down and we're like, well, you know, we have access now to all these different resources. We have created different systems, so now we can train them. So we started training them in managerial skills, such as reading profit and loss reports, how to create a schedule, how to do inventory. We realized there were other gaps, such as emotional intelligence, so we started referring to different agencies within the community. And I was able to fill in also in trainings with mental health, anxiety, and stress. And as we were doing this, we noticed that retention rates started changing. And I'm happy to say now that 4 of our suburban locations are now franchised, owned by previous employees. 6 of our locations are owner-operated, meaning that the managers from that store share the profits with us. And then organically, because they started creating their own social capital, similar to what happened in the preschool, little clusters started happening. So now they were talking to each other and asking, how did you make it? Who did you talk to? So the social capital started expanding. And it was organic. Again, you know, I was forced to look at my past of scarcity and my mind shift, and we started creating systems change because of this. Now, you know, because I had to look at my past, this change happened. And this also happened to the greater Charlotte. So if any of you remember, back in 2013, there was a report that came out by Dr. Raschetti. And this report talked about economic mobility and looked at the ability for a city to either promote or prevent economic mobility. Charlotte was in last place, meaning that if a person was born into poverty, it was going to be very difficult to come out of it. And Charlotte leaders did take it seriously. They created an opportunity task force report, and from it came Leading on Opportunity, which is a nonprofit organization who is looking at the recommendations and partnering with others to figure out how can we change this problem that none of us created because it's based on things that happened in the past, is affecting us now, but how do we change this for the future? As co-chair of this organization, it has really shaped who I am as an employer and who I am as a social worker, because I have watched how different leaders from the community, whether it's government, education, whether it's a nonprofit, have come together to put their resources together to see how can we change this? Because we don't want this to be the truth for our city. So within 10 years, we went from being 50 to 38. And again, this did not happen by chance. It happened by doing systems change, by people choosing to share resources with one another, by expanding networks, inviting people to the table that maybe sometimes are left out. I was one of them. I was invited to tables I had no idea that my voice was needed in that space. So as we think about systems change, we talked about a preschool, we talked about the greater Charlotte, we talked about my company, that just by doing small little changes with resources that we already have, we don't have to completely reinvent, completely do something different. It's things that we already have. Spaces maybe that we have access to, people that we have access to. And how do we bring more people into the table? Because we need everybody's voices in order for things to change. We need everyone to come together and share the resources that we have, because it will not happen by chance. And sometimes it does come from a moment where we are desperate, a moment that we are forced to look at our past, to reimagine a different way of living and collaborating with one another. So as you sit here today, I invite you to think about whether you were born into scarcity, were you born into wealth, who has opened a door for you, who has invited you to a table that has allowed you to be where you are today. Because going back to Bowen's systems theory, it takes one person, one agent of change to make change start happening. So there's a lot of one of us here. Imagine the changes we can have. So we need one another. And as my pastor says, Pastor Brian Davis, we are needy and we are needed. We need each other. So today I do want to thank everybody who has opened a space for me, everybody who has invited me to a room that I didn't know that I needed to be there. I want to thank the immigrant families who have chosen to leave everything behind, including their children, like my parents did, to give their family another chance. Y a mi papá y a mi mamá, como siempre, muchísimas gracias. Thank you.